She was already bleeding when they found her. Not from fear, not from carelessness. From a choice she had made 47 minutes earlier in the dark alone with a piece of metal lodged in her left shoulder and a man dying in her arms. The math was simple. His life or her comfort. She had already decided. Her right hand pressed combat gauze hard against the wound in the Marine's chest. Her left arm hung at the wrong angle. The sleeve of her uniform soaked through, turned the deep burgundy that medics learn to recognize before they learn almost anything else. She did not look at her own shoulder. There was no point looking at something you had already accepted. The helicopter was coming. She could hear it. The distinctive thud of rotor blades cutting through the Iraqi night, still 2 minutes out, maybe 3. Around her, the compound had gone quiet in the way battlefields go quiet after everything terrible has already happened. The smell of cordite and dust hung in the air like something permanent. The Marine beneath her hands was 22 years old. She knew that because she had read every file before they left the wire. She made it a habit. Know their blood types, know their allergies, know their ages, know their names. Because when it is 3 in the morning and a man is staring up at you with that particular look, the look that asks whether this is where it ends, you need to be able to say his name. She said it now, quietly, steadily. Stay with me, Granger. That's an order. She had not slept in 29 hours. She had not eaten since morning. Her body was performing a muted, insistent screaming that she had learned over the years to set aside the way you set aside an alarm clock when you already know you have to get up. She breathed in. She breathed out. She kept both hands where they needed to be. The helicopter grew louder. 72 hours earlier, none of this had happened yet. 72 hours earlier, she was still just the medic who should not have been there. Forward Operating Base Fallujah sat in Anbar province like something the desert had reluctantly agreed to tolerate. The base was a collection of HESCO barriers, plywood structures, and prefabricated containers, arranged in the methodical, unglamorous way of a place that prioritized function over everything else. The perimeter walls were stained by 2 years of weather and the particular kind of dust that exists nowhere on Earth except here. Pale, fine, pervasive. The kind that gets into everything, including thoughts you thought were private. The heat at midday reached 110 degrees. The air tasted like metal and exhaustion. In the mornings before the sun became unbearable, there was a quality of light that turned the compound almost golden for a few minutes. Then the day began in earnest, and the gold burned away into white glare and shadows with hard edges. The CH-53 Sea Stallion came in low and fast the way transport helicopters do when the people flying them have learned not to be a stationary target any longer than necessary. It touched down in a cloud of pale dust that reduced visibility to nothing. Equipment crates, supply boxes, and 3 replacement personnel stepped off the ramp in rapid succession. The last one off was Reese Hartley. She was 23 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, and weighed 115 pounds. Her brown hair was pulled back tightly beneath her cover. Her uniform was pressed despite the 14-hour journey that had preceded this moment. She wore the caduceus insignia of a Navy hospital corpsman on her collar and carried a medical ruck on her back that weighed 70 pounds more than half her own body weight, with the ease of someone who had been carrying heavy things for a long time. She stepped off the ramp and immediately looked up, not at the base, at the perimeter, at the ridge lines in the distance where the desert met the sky in a jagged horizon. She stood there for 4 seconds, studying the high ground, the way people study things they want to understand before those things understand them. Then she looked back down, adjusted the strap on her left shoulder, and walked toward the operations center without speaking to anyone. Staff Sergeant Trent Callahan was sitting on an ammunition crate outside the motor pool when she passed. He was 36 years old, broad across the shoulders, with the settled confidence of a man who had survived several things that should have killed him. He watched her walk past with the easy appraisal of someone who had been in this part of the world long enough to have opinions about who belonged here. He looked at the corpsman who had just stepped off the Sea Stallion. He looked at the man sitting next to him. They sent us a kid. Lance Corporal Wade Merrick, 20 years old and 4 months into his first deployment, started to respond. But Master Sergeant Cade Brennan appeared from around the corner of the motor pool at that exact moment, and something in his expression suggested that whatever Merrick was about to say should probably stay unsaid. Brennan watched Reese Hartley walk toward the operations center. His face gave away almost nothing, but his eyes tracked her with the attention of a man who has learned to notice things before he has decided what to think about them. Brennan had been in the Marine Corps for 38 years. He had served in Panama in 1989, in the Gulf War in 1991, and Somalia in 1993. He had developed over those years an instinct for categorizing people within the first few minutes of observing them. Not by rank or gender or background, but by something in the way a person moved and looked and carried themselves that told him whether they understood the world he operated in. Most people did not. Occasionally, someone did. He went back to what he was doing, but the tracking in his eyes continued for a moment after she had disappeared from view. Inside the medical station, Reese set down her ruck and looked at the room she had inherited. The previous corpsman had organized the supplies in alphabetical order. Reese stood in the doorway for 30 seconds, reading the arrangement the way a mechanic reads an engine. Not for what was there, but for what it revealed about the mind that had created it. Alphabetical order was logical. It was also, in a tactical context, useless. When a man is bleeding out, no one reaches for bandages and thinks the letter B. They reach for what their hands know is there, because their hands have practiced reaching for it in the correct sequence, in the correct order of urgency, in the dark under pressure, without thought. She spent the next 2 hours reorganizing everything. When she finished, the station looked different. Less tidy, perhaps, to an outside eye. But every item of critical equipment occupied exactly the position it would need to occupy when seconds were the currency being spent. Tourniquets within reach of either hand without looking. Chest seals grouped by type. Hemostatic gauze in the outer pocket, not the inner. Nasopharyngeal airways accessible without opening a secondary container. She was running through the inventory a final time when Captain Holden Thorne appeared in the doorway. He was 47 years old, lean in the way of people who forget to eat when thinking hard, with gray at his temples, and the careful evaluating eyes of a man who had made decisions under pressure long enough that it had become simply the way he made decisions. He looked at what she had done to the medical station. He looked at her. "Settling in, Corpsman Hartley?" she answered without turning around. "Almost finished, sir." He stayed in the doorway for another few seconds. Then he left. He had noted the reorganization. He had noted that she had moved things in ways that made sense if you knew what combat looked like from close up. He filed it without conclusion and walked back toward the operations center. The first test came on the second day. It was mid-morning already, 108 degrees, and a training exercise was underway in the southern portion of the compound. A team of 8 men was running a rehearsal for a compound entry drill. Repetitive, physical, unglamorous work performed in full kit under a sun that did not care about anyone's schedule. Reese was running her morning checks on the medical station when she heard something in the cadence of the men's movement that changed slightly. The kind of change most people would not hear. She heard it. She stepped out. Lance Corporal Hayes was walking in an unsteady line between the staging area and the water point, concentrating very hard on the act of walking, which is usually a sign that walking is requiring more concentration than it should. His face was the color of someone whose internal systems were beginning to make executive decisions his conscious mind was not yet aware of. Reese crossed to him in 15 seconds. She did not ask how he was feeling. She put 2 fingers against the inside of his wrist and counted for 15 seconds while simultaneously reading his eyes, his skin color, and the coordination of his movement. Then she put her other hand against the back of his neck. She looked at Callahan. "Get him inside. Core temperature above 104. If we don't drop it in the next 10 minutes, he goes into convulsions." Callahan looked at Hayes. Hayes did objectively look like a man considering sitting down on the ground, regardless of whether the ground wanted him. Callahan picked him up under one arm and moved. Inside, Reese worked with the focused economy of someone who has run this sequence before. Ice packs to the neck, armpits, and groin. Oral hydration where he could tolerate it. Oxygen flow. Temperature checks every 90 seconds. She talked to Hayes throughout in the flat, steady tone of someone who finds calm useful and has therefore made it a permanent occupant of their voice. By the time the second temperature check came back 101.2 and declining, Hayes's eyes had cleared and he was capable of coherent sentences. Callahan stood near the back of the station watching. He had the expression of a man revising a calculation he had not known he was performing. He went back outside without saying anything, but he walked slightly differently than he had walked in, and Brennan, standing near the entrance, noticed. Later that evening, Brennan found Callahan cleaning his rifle near the wire. He sat down without being invited. A silence of the comfortable kind passed between them. "She knew before he did," Brennan said. Callahan kept his attention on the rifle. "Could be training." Brennan said nothing else, but his eyes, when Callahan glanced up, carried the weight of 38 years of watching people under pressure. The kind of watching that has learned to separate performance from presence. The second test came that night without warning, the way second tests always do. A Humvee returning from a resupply run struck a section of uneven ground at speed. The impact was not catastrophic by the standards of this part of the world, but Corporal Granger had been positioned at an angle when the vehicle lurched and the compression had done something significant to his chest. By the time they got him to the medical station, Granger was breathing in the rapid, shallow, increasingly desperate way that indicates the body is working extremely hard to accomplish something it is failing to accomplish. His trachea had deviated slightly to the left. His breath sounds on the right side were absent. Reese was in the station when they brought him in. On her feet before the men carrying him had finished explaining what happened. She did not need them to finish. Tension pneumothorax, needle decompression, second intercostal space. Hold him still. What followed happened in something very close to darkness. The station's primary lighting had not yet been switched on. She worked by touch and position and the coordinates of a human body she had studied until they were as familiar as the geography of her own hands. The needle found its mark. The sound that followed air escaping where it had been trapped was one of the more reliable sounds in trauma medicine. Granger's breathing immediately changed, shallower to deeper, faster to slower. The shift of a man coming back from a place he had been very close to, not returning from. Brennan had followed the men in. He stood near the door where the darkness was slightly less complete and watched. He watched the positioning of her hands. He watched the absence of hesitation. He watched the way she spoke to Granger throughout. Steady, quiet, informative. Not the way someone speaks to calm a person down, but the way someone speaks who knows that information is itself a form of stability. When it was done, Brennan stepped out without speaking. He walked to the eastern wall of the base and stood there looking out into the dark. He had known a few people like her in his career. Not many. The specific qualities she had, the kind of competence so deep it has stopped being something performed and become simply something present. He recognized it the way you recognize a dialect you grew up around, but have not heard in a long time. It told him things. He was not yet sure what to do with what it told him. He would watch. He had learned that watching was almost always more useful than speaking. The fifth day was a Tuesday. Tuesdays at Forward Operating Base Fallujah were by informal tradition the days the team ran range qualification and live fire refreshers. The open ground to the east provided natural sound dampening beyond 600 meters, making the range practical without advertising the base's position to anyone on the ridge lines paying attention. Reese was not scheduled for the range. She walked there anyway. She told herself it was a perimeter check. She told herself she was cataloging sight lines from a medical positioning standpoint, identifying locations where casualties might need to be reached quickly. This was true. She was doing all of those things, but it was not the complete truth, and she had been in the habit of honesty with herself long enough that she acknowledged this quietly and kept walking. The range was occupied by 8 men running carbine drills at 200 and 400 meters. Captain Thorne stood off to the side, observing the way commanders observe when assessing readiness. Callahan was running the session with the energy of someone who finds this kind of work genuinely satisfying. Wade Merrick was at the 400-meter line working through positional shots with an expression of profound concentration that suggested he was not confident in the results. At the 400-meter target, Merrick settled into prone, made his adjustments, and fired. The round hit the outer ring. He was off by approximately 18 inches. He knew it. Reese, standing 60 feet away, looked at the wind flags placed at 200 and 300 meters. She looked at the angle of the flags. She looked at Merrick's position. She looked at the target. She ran the calculation the way she had run thousands of calculations. Without effort, without ceremony, with the automatic reliability of a function so deeply learned it no longer requires conscious activation. The wind was coming from roughly 3 o'clock relative to Merrick's position. He had not corrected for it. The correction needed was approximately 2 clicks and a 6-inch hold to the right. She said it before she realized she was saying it. Wind right to left 8 miles per hour, hold right edge 6 inches. She said it at normal conversational volume, not directed at anyone in particular. The way you say something you are thinking rather than something you intend to communicate. But in the partial quiet between shots, several people heard it. Merrick heard it. He looked over his shoulder at her with an expression somewhere between confused and curious. Then, with the practical instinct of someone who will try anything if his alternative is another miss, at 400 meters, he made the adjustment. He fired. The round hit center mass. The range went slightly quiet in the way that ranges go quiet when something unexpected has occurred and people are deciding how to process it. Callahan was looking at her. His expression was not the easy dismissal of the first day. It was something more uncertain. The expression of a man whose original calculation has been complicated by new data and who is not yet sure what the new calculation should look like. Captain Thorne from his position off to the side heard. He looked at Reese for 3 seconds. Then he looked back at the range. Later, after the session had ended and the range cleared, Reese walked through the rifle station alone on her way back from the northern perimeter. She was not planning to stop. She had not given herself permission to stop. The M40A3 sniper rifle was in its rack on the western wall. She saw it the way you see something you have been trying not to look at and have finally, in an unguarded moment, looked at anyway. She stopped walking. She stood there in the quiet of the empty station at a distance of approximately 8 feet from the rifle and looked at it. Not with want exactly, with a complicated recognition of someone for whom a thing is both deeply familiar and deeply off limits. Like a door to a room in a house where you grew up, a room that has been closed for years for reasons decided by grief and love in approximately equal measure. She had been 7 years old the first morning her father set a rifle in front of her on a bench at the back of their property in San Diego. He had not been a man who wasted words on preamble. He placed it there and looked at her. "Before you touch it, tell me what it is." "It's a rifle," she had said. "A 308. He had looked at her with the expression of a patient man who was also a precise man. "Tell me what it is." She had thought about it. She was 7, but she had been listening to him since she was old enough to listen, and she understood already that her father did not ask small questions. "It's a tool," she said eventually. "It does what the person holding it decides to do." He nodded. "And what does that make the person holding it responsible?" He smiled. He did not smile frequently. When he did, she kept the memory of it, the way you keep things that might need to last a long time. They shot every weekend for 4 years. Through California summers that turned the air into something you waded through rather than breathed. Through the year her mother got sick and then got better. Through the months before he deployed to the Gulf. And then one February morning in 1991, a Marine in dress blues came to their house in San Diego. And after that, there were no more weekends. Her mother had asked only one thing. In the weeks after, in the house that had become full of silences that used to be full of her father, her mother looked at her and said with a quietness that was itself a form of devastation, "Promise me you won't. Promise me you'll never touch a rifle again." "I can't lose you too." She had promised because it was what her mother needed. Because grief asks for things and love provides them. Because she was 11 years old and the man who had taught her to be steady was gone, and being steady was the only thing left she knew how to do for the people still there. 12 years. She had kept that promise for 12 years. Her hand moved. It was not a conscious decision. It was the movement of a hand that had made this particular motion thousands of times, reaching for something that had spent years occupying the space where that motion expected something to be. Pure muscle memory, the oldest kind of knowing, the kind your body maintains independent of what your mind has decided. She caught herself, pulled her hand back, let her arm fall to her side. She turned and walked out of the station without looking back. But she had not been alone. Master Sergeant Cade Brennan had come in from the far end of the structure, silent in the way of men who have spent careers learning to move quietly there to check on equipment that needed a part ordered. He had seen her stop. He had seen her look at the rifle. He had seen the movement of her hand in the moment it arrested and the deliberate quality of the way she turned and left. He stood in the empty station after she was gone. He looked at the M40A3 in its rack. He looked at the doorway she had walked through. He had a picture now that he had not had before. It was not complete. There were gaps, shapes he could not yet define, but the outline was becoming visible the way outlines do when enough pieces have assembled themselves in the same space. He did not say anything to anyone that evening, but something in him had made a decision he had not yet put into words. Outside, the desert held the last of the day's light for a few minutes longer than anything below it did. The ridge lines burned orange and then faded to gray, and then to the deep darkness of a sky with no competition from electricity for miles in any direction. Reese sat in the medical station and ran through her inventory one more time. She was thorough. She was quiet. She did not look toward the western wall, but her hands resting on the edge of the supply table were absolutely still. Steady the way her father had taught them to be. Steady in the way that things are steady when they have been tested often enough that steadiness has stopped being an effort and become simply the default condition of being. In 2 days, those hands would be asked to do something she had promised herself they would never do again. She did not know that yet, but somewhere in the part of her that had grown up on a bench behind a house in San Diego, learning to calculate wind and distance and the particular patience required to make a thing happen at 600 meters, that most people could not make happen at 60. That part of her had already begun quietly without her permission to prepare. 2 days passed in the quiet routine of a forward operating base between missions. Reese ran her inventory checks, treated minor injuries, watched the men train in the heat. The rifle station remained off limits to her by choice, though she thought about it more than she wanted to admit. She did not know that a promise made 12 years ago was about to find her. She did not know that Chief Warrant Officer Silas Kane had requested transfer to this base specifically to deliver something he had been carrying since February 25, 1991. The seventh day began the way most days at Forward Operating Base Fallujah began, with heat that arrived before the sun did, turning the air thick and metallic even in the pre-dawn darkness. Reese was awake at 04:30 running her morning inventory. She had learned years ago that sleep was negotiable. Preparedness was not. She was checking the seals on the last of the chest wound kits when Chief Warrant Officer Silas Kane appeared in the doorway of the medical station. He was 45 years old with the weathered face of a man who had spent more of his life in the sun than out of it. Scottish descent with pale eyes that missed very little and a stillness about him that suggested he had seen enough chaos to have developed an appreciation for its absence. He stood in the doorway for a moment, not speaking, just looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. Then he said her name. Corpsman Hartley. She turned. Chief. He stepped inside. The medical station was small enough that 3 steps brought him to where she stood. I need to speak with you, he said, about your father. The inventory checklist in her hand went still. You knew him. It was not a question. Kuwait, Kane said. 1991. I was his second. Force Recon 1st Marines. The air in the medical station changed quality, became something denser. You were one of the 8, Reese said. Kane nodded. I was one of the 8 who got out. He reached into the inside pocket of his uniform blouse and produced an envelope. It was the kind of envelope that has been kept carefully for a long time. The paper had acquired the ivory quality of age and the fold lines were sharp from years of being maintained in exactly the same configuration. Her name was written on the front in handwriting she recognized before she could have explained how she recognized it. The way you recognize things, learned before you had a vocabulary for how learning happens. He gave me this, Kane said, the night before the raid. February 25th, 1991. He said, find my daughter when she's old enough to understand. Give her this. He held it out. Reese took it with both hands. The envelope was lighter than she expected. Important things often are. I tried to find you, Kane said. Took me 12 years. Your mother moved, changed numbers, the casualty record system. It took time. You kept your promise, Reese said. I gave him my word. She looked at the envelope in her hands. Her name in her father's handwriting. Sealed 12 years. Thank you, Chief. Kane nodded once. Then he turned and left, understanding without being told that what came next required privacy. Reese stood alone in the medical station with the envelope in her hands. Outside the base was beginning its morning routines. The sound of boots on gravel, the diesel rumble of generators, the particular quality of noise that a military installation makes when it wakes. She sat down on the edge of the supply table and opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages handwritten, the lines straight in the way of someone who has a disciplined hand and uses it. The date in the upper right corner was February 25th, 1991, the evening before. She read, Reese. If you are reading this, I did not make it home. I am writing this not because I think tomorrow will go wrong, but because a Marine prepares for what he hopes will not happen. That is what responsibility requires. I have been trying to think what I want to tell you, and I keep arriving at the same few things. First, you should not spend your life being angry on my behalf. What I do with clear eyes. The cost of a choice is not a reason to refuse the choice. I taught you this over 1,000 shots at 1,000 targets. It is still true. Second, your mother will ask you to promise never to serve, never to fight. You will agree because you love her. Keep that promise as long as it comes from love. But if it ever comes from fear, if keeping it means watching good people die when you could have stopped it, I give you my permission to let it go. You were built for both, Reese. The hands that heal are the same hands that protect. One does not cancel the other. They were always meant to work together. Third, you have always been braver than me. You just did not know it yet. When the moment comes, and it will come, trust yourself. Steady hands, clear eyes. Everything else is noise. I love you, not past tense. Love does not observe tense. I love you in whatever form I am in when you read this. Do not forget that. Dad. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the front pocket of her uniform blouse over her sternum, where it would rest against her chest. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise over the eastern ridgeline, turning the sky from black to gray to the pale gold of another desert morning. She sat for a moment longer in the quiet of the medical station, holding her father's words inside her, the way you hold things that change the shape of who you are. Then she stood up and went back to work, because that was what he would have told her to do. The mission brief came on the 9th evening. Captain Thorne stood at the front of the operations room with the economy of movement of someone who has delivered briefings in enough tight spaces that unnecessary motion has been eliminated from the process entirely. The room held 14 people. Reese was not one of them. She stood outside in the narrow corridor between the operations center and the adjacent structure, close enough to hear through the canvas partition without having been invited. She told herself she was there for medical planning purposes. Knowing the route, the timing, the likely contact zones, all of it was relevant to how she would preposition supplies, what she would pack, where she would need to be. This was true. It was also not the only reason she was standing in that corridor at that particular hour. The compound was in the northern sector, 14 kilometers out. Intelligence had identified it as a staging point for an Al-Qaeda cell moving weapons and personnel through the Anbar corridor. The approach would be conducted at night on foot for the final 4 kilometers, with vehicle support staged at a forward holding point 6 kilometers east. The timeline was tight. The terrain was unforgiving. The extraction window was 15 minutes from the moment of entry. Captain Thorne's voice through the canvas was flat and precise. He gave the route, he gave the contingencies, he gave the communications plan and the abort criteria and the casualty collection point locations. He spoke for 11 minutes without repeating himself. When it was done, the men filed out. Captain Thorne came last. He found Reese in the corridor. He looked at her for a moment. "You'll be with Chalk 2 on the approach. Primary casualty collection at the grid I'll give you separately. You stay with your Chalk unless I tell you otherwise." She nodded. He started to move past her. Then he stopped. "Hartley, build your kit for a contact scenario, not a training day." He walked away. Reese went to the medical station and began building her kit. The night of the mission was cool by the standards of Anbar province. 68 degrees at 2200 hours when they stepped off. A quarter-moon intermittent cloud cover wind moving at a consistent 6 miles per hour from the northwest. The men moved through the darkness with the flat efficiency of people who have long since stopped negotiating with physical discomfort and simply coexist with it. Reese moved with them. She had packed the ruck herself as always. Every item in its place, every contingency accounted for. The weight across her back was 68 pounds. Familiar in the way of things that have been carried long enough that their absence would feel stranger than their presence. She breathed through the first kilometer and settled into the pace. And after that, her body found its rhythm and the ruck became part of her, the way it always did. Not something additional, just something present. Chalk 2 was 12 men plus Reese. Master Sergeant Brennan ran the Chalk, moving at the front with the quiet authority of a man who has navigated terrain like this often enough that he no longer has to think about where to put his feet. Wade Merrick was 3 positions back, young enough to find the darkness mildly exciting, experienced enough to know he should not show it. Trent Callahan was at the rear, close enough to respond immediately, far enough back to see the entire formation at once. They made the approach in 53 minutes. No contact, the kind of movement that feels almost tedious right up until it is not. The compound appeared out of the dark the way compounds do in this part of the world. A collection of mud brick walls that the darkness made ambiguous until you were close enough for the details to resolve. 3 structures, a central courtyard, a gate on the southern wall that had been reinforced recently, the mortar fresher than the surrounding material. 2 members of the team noticed this. Reese, coming up behind them, also noticed without being asked. The strike team entered on Captain Thorne's signal. It was clean for the first 9 minutes. Then the IED detonated in the northern courtyard. The blast was not the largest Reese had heard. It was also not the smallest. It compressed the air in the way that high-order explosive compresses air. A physical event you feel before you hear. A pressure wave that moves through the body faster than the mind can process what is producing it. The night fractured into noise and dust, and the particular chaos that follows any event that eliminates all prior assumptions about how the next 60 seconds will unfold. Reese was moving before the dust had fully resolved. The 2 nearest casualties were 12 meters ahead of her position. She covered the distance at a run low, using the compound wall's shadow for what cover it offered. The first man was Staff Sergeant Callahan. He was on his back, conscious, his right hand holding his left leg, in a way that told her the femoral artery had been compromised. She could see the arterial bleed from 2 meters away, the specific dark pulsing quality of it in the ambient starlight. She was beside him in one movement. "Brick, stay with me." She had her tourniquet out and was applying it 4 inches above the wound in the 3 seconds it took her to process the location and severity. The cat tourniquet cinched. She tightened it until the bleeding changed from arterial pulse to something that could be managed. She marked the time on the tourniquet with the marker clipped to her chest strap, 0039. She looked at his face. He was still with her. "Stay on the ground. Don't move the leg. I will be back." She moved. The second casualty was against the compound's northern wall. Private First Class Granger, sitting forward at an angle that told her something had happened to his chest before she had crossed the 5 meters between them. Fragment entry right side below the clavicle. Not arterial, but the wound was open and needed sealing before movement. She pressed the combat gauze in with her right hand and held it there while she talked to him in the flat, steady voice she kept for exactly these moments. Not the voice of comfort, but the voice of information. Because men under fire respond to information better than they respond to comfort. Because information tells them someone in the darkness has a plan. She held the seal until his breathing changed from labored to something that could sustain him to the next stage of treatment. She marked him stable and moved. Chalk 3 had breached the eastern wall and was pushing through the compound interior. Radio traffic told her the primary objective had been confirmed inside the northern structure. The timeline was moving. Then the shot came from the eastern ridge line. The position was elevated and distant, 950 meters at minimum, possibly further. The first round hit the compound wall 6 inches above Captain Thorne's head. It was either an adjustment shot or a warning. In either case, it functioned as the same thing. A message that the eastern ridge line belonged to someone who was going to make the extraction timeline very difficult. Chalk 3 went flat. 8 men against the eastern compound wall, unable to advance without presenting themselves to a shooter they could not see at a distance. They could not effectively return fire across. Reese heard the report. She processed it in the 2 seconds she had between finishing her work on Granger and moving toward the next casualty. She turned her head and found Brennan. He was already looking at her. 40 meters away near the western wall, Chief Kane was positioning himself with the M40A3 sniper rifle, the designated marksman. The man whose job it was to address exactly this kind of problem. Then an RPG round detonated against the wall 8 feet from his position, and the shrapnel storm that followed caught him across the right shoulder. Kane went down. The M40A3 clattered to the ground beside him. Reese saw it happen. Saw Kane try to pick up the rifle with his right arm and fail. Saw him look at his shoulder with the expression of a man assessing a problem rather than experiencing emotion about it. Saw him look across the courtyard at Captain Thorne. Captain Thorne looked back at him. There was a silence of perhaps 2 seconds while the captain ran through his options and arrived at one he had not predicted. Then Captain Thorne turned his head. He did not look at his team. He looked at Reese Hartley crouched against the northern wall, both hands finishing the tie on Granger's chest seal. He did not say anything. He simply looked at her in the specific way of a commander who has run through his options and arrived at one that involves asking something he is not certain should be asked. Reese finished the knot on the seal. She checked Granger's eyes. She told him to keep pressure on it and stay low, and she would be back. Then she stood up. She crossed to Kane. She looked at his shoulder. The fragment had entered at an angle that suggested the joint was compromised but not destroyed. Painful enough that holding a rifle steady at 950 meters was not going to happen. She looked at the M40A3 on the ground beside him. She looked at Master Sergeant Brennan. Brennan was watching her with an expression that contained several things at once: concern, calculation, and something that might have been permission, though he had not spoken it aloud. "Master Sergeant," she said, "I can make that shot." Brennan looked at her for 3 seconds. "You're a corpsman." "I'm my father's daughter." Another 2 seconds passed. The sound of gunfire from the eastern wall, the radio traffic reporting Chalk 3 still pinned. Then Brennan nodded once. "Make it count." Reese picked up the M40A3. The rifle weighed 14.5 pounds unloaded. It was longer than the rifle she had shot as a child, heavier built for a different kind of precision. But the fundamentals were the same. The weight, the balance, the way it settled against your shoulder when you knew what you were doing. She got into position on the western wall behind a section of parapet that gave her a firing rest and the necessary elevation angle. She settled the bipod. She found the scope. 950 meters. The ridge was visible as an elevation line against the slightly lighter gray of the sky. The shooter's position was a darker irregularity in the natural contour of the rock, a gap between two limestone formations where a person with patience could lie completely still and have a clear line on the compound below. She found the gap. She ran the calculation. Wind at 6 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature 68 degrees. Elevation differential approximately 200 feet. The bullet would drop, the wind would push it left. She built the adjustments into the hold. She breathed in. The first shot missed. The wind shifted in the 3 seconds between when she had read it and when the round reached 950 meters. Not a dramatic shift, 3 miles per hour. But at that distance, 3 miles per hour is the difference between where you aimed and where the round went, and they are not the same place. From across the courtyard, Callahan said something. Not loud, the comment of a man whose prior expectation is being confirmed. She heard it. She filed it without reaction. She read the wind again. She thought about the approach march, about how the wind had felt against the left side of her face for the last kilometer, about the way the dust had moved off the courtyard walls when the firefight started. She made an adjustment that lived entirely in the calculation she was holding in her head and the degree to which she altered her hold point in the scope. She breathed in, let half of it out. She felt her heart beat the way she had been taught to feel it, not as something to fight, but as something to work with, to find the space between beats where the body is briefly completely still. She found that space. She fired. On the eastern ridge at 952 meters, the shooter did not fire again. The compound went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. There is a quality to silence that follows a threat being removed that is distinct from every other kind of silence. And everyone in that courtyard who had been in enough firefights to recognize it felt it at the same moment. Reese lowered the rifle. She set it down. She stood up cross-back to Granger, knelt beside him, and checked his chest seal. His eyes looking up at her were complicated in a way that would have required a long time to fully describe. She said nothing to him. She checked the wound, confirmed the seal was seated correctly, and began preparing him for movement. Behind her, 12 men were processing what they had just seen in 12 different ways. Some of those ways were loud internally, some were quiet, and all of them involved a significant revision of something. Callahan was standing near the eastern wall. He was not moving. He was looking at the western parapet where she had been positioned, and his face was doing something that his face in all the time anyone at Forward Operating Base Fallujah had known him had not previously done. Something in the vicinity of recalibration, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind you can only see if you know what to look for. Master Sergeant Brennan knew what to look for. He found it. He said nothing. They extracted without further contact. The entire return march happened in near total silence. Not the tactical silence of men maintaining noise discipline, the different silence of people who are thinking. In the days that followed, no one spoke to Reese directly about the shot. But conversations happen. Callahan found Brennan at the vehicle maintenance bay the morning after they returned. He sat down. He was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone building towards something. 952 meters, Callahan said. Wind shift, mid-flight. She recalculated and fired in under 4 seconds. Brennan was working a wrench on a fitting that did not particularly need working on. First shot missed, Callahan said. Brennan set down the wrench. She did not flinch, Callahan said. Most people first shot goes wide, there is a moment. She just read the wind again and shot. Brennan looked at him. Where do you learn that? Callahan said. Not the mechanics, the composure. Brennan picked up the wrench again. Same place you learn anything real, from someone who already had it. Callahan sat with that for a moment. Then he stood up and walked away without asking the follow-up question. He had been in the Marine Corps long enough to recognize when an answer had already been given. Wade Merrick asked her directly. He had never been the kind of person who found indirection efficient. He found her in the medical station on the second morning after the mission, doing inventory in the way she always did, methodically, without haste, each item verified and replaced in its position. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then he came in and sat on the edge of the supply table. Doc, where did you learn to shoot like that? She continued the inventory. My father taught me. He waited to see if there was more. Who was he? She closed the supply box. She looked at Merrick for a moment with the expression of someone deciding how much of a true thing to say. He was a Marine, Force Recon. He is gone now. Merrick nodded. He had the instinct at 20 to ask the next question. He also had enough situational awareness to recognize that the question had already been answered in the quality of the silence that followed, and that asking it out loud would be adding noise where it was not wanted. He got up and left. It was Chief Kane who told her the rest of the story. He had been in the medical station for 2 days by then. His shoulder stabilized through the first critical night. The joint managing better than the first assessment had suggested it would, though not well enough for operational duties. He was a patient the way experienced operators usually are. Cooperative, uncomplaining, deeply bored, and possessed of an attention to his immediate environment that even convalescence did not diminish. Reese had been checking his shoulder twice daily. The routine had established a quiet between them. Not the awkward silence of strangers, but the functional quiet of people comfortable enough not to require constant verbal maintenance. He watched her work. She worked. Occasionally, he made a dry observation about something, and she replied with a short precision that in a restrained way came close to being funny. On the second morning, he said something that was not a dry observation. "I need to tell you the rest, about Kuwait, about your father." Reese was wrapping the shoulder. Her hands did not stop. "All right." Kane let a moment pass. Then he looked at the wall in the way of looking at a wall when saying something difficult, carrying the weight of it without performing the grief. "Kuwait, February 26, 1991. He corrected himself internally. "We had just completed the raid. 3 Iraqi artillery positions destroyed. The extraction landing zone was supposed to be clear." He paused. It was not clear. The story he told her took 12 minutes. He told it without embellishment because he was the kind of man who had learned that the truth in its plain form already contains everything embellishment tries to add. He told her about the approach to the landing zone. The moment they came over the ridge and saw the Iraqi Republican Guard waiting. 30 soldiers, 2 T-72 tanks, a kill box. Her father had stopped the column, one hand raised flat, definitive. The hand of a man who has made a decision. He turned to Kane at the rear of the formation and used the hand signal for abort. Then he used the hand signal for something else. The signal that means go, just go. The ambush initiated 30 seconds after Kane's position cleared the southern end of the approach. Kane had heard it from 200 meters back. He had heard the volume of fire and understood with the understanding of a man who has been in enough firefights to read them like text, that what was happening could not be survived by the person absorbing it so that everyone else could be somewhere else. 8 men got out. Captain Garrett Hartley was not one of them. "I tried to go back," Kane said. 2 of us tried. They pulled us out. We tried again at first light with a full quick reaction force." He looked at her directly. There was nothing left to go back to. Reese was looking at her own hands in her lap. She was not crying. She was doing the things she had learned to do with very large things, holding them in both hands without dropping them and without pretending they were smaller than they were. Kane was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Before we went out that night, he told me something. He said, if this goes the way I think it might go, find my daughter and tell her I knew what I was doing. Tell her it was a choice I made with clear eyes. Tell her that." He paused. "I tried to find you twice. Both times the contact information in his file was outdated. His unit records were in processing, then sealed, then in a review cycle. I filed a request with Casualty Affairs in 2014 and again in 2016. Both times I got acknowledgement letters and nothing else." He looked at her. "When I heard your name on the assignment manifest, I thought I had misread it. Then I saw you on the range. Then I saw you on that parapet with the rifle, and I knew I had not misread anything." The medical station was quiet in the way of small rooms when significant things had been said inside them. Reese sat with what he had given her, not trying to rearrange it, not trying to make it smaller or larger than it was, just holding it. He knew it was a setup, she said. He knew it was possible. The geometry of that approach was wrong enough that he made the call he made. He chose to absorb it. Kane looked at her steadily. He chose to make sure the rest of us did not have to. She nodded slowly. The nod of a person not agreeing with something, but acknowledging the weight of it. The nod of a daughter who has spent 12 years building a version of her father's death inside her head. A version containing all the information she had been given, which was not enough, and none of the information she was hearing now, which was what had been missing. She stood up. She was steadier than he expected, steadier than most people would have been. "You have been looking for me for 12 years, she said. "Your father asked me to find you. That made it an obligation." She looked at him for a moment. There was something in her face that was not gratitude exactly, though gratitude was part of it. It was the expression of a person who has spent a long time carrying a weight they did not know had a name and has just been told the name. "I need to run my inventory check," she said. "I will be back this evening for the shoulder." He nodded. She walked out of the medical station and across the compound and through the gate in the eastern wall to the narrow open ground between the perimeter and the maintenance sheds. She stood there for a while. The morning air was cool and carried dust and the distant smell of the desert. The ridge lines stood above everything in the permanent way of ridge lines. She thought about a morning in San Diego when she was 12 years old and her father had made her lie in prone position for 20 minutes without firing. Just breathing. Just learning what it felt like to be still. She had asked him why. He said because the stillness has to come before anything else. You cannot build accuracy on movement. You build accuracy on stillness, and then movement comes after. She had been still for 12 years. That evening, new intelligence arrived. The intelligence came through at 1800 hours on the 11th day. Captain Thorne called the senior staff into the operations room. Master Sergeant Brennan was there. Chief Kane, his shoulder wrapped but his mind sharp. The platoon leaders, the senior NCOs. Reese was not invited. She stood in the same corridor as before, listening through the canvas partition. The target was a fortified compound 8 kilometers north of the previous objective. Intelligence had confirmed the presence of Abu Bakr al-Takriti, a regional al-Qaeda commander responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 provinces. High value, high risk. The compound was larger than the last. 4 structures instead of 3. Walls reinforced with steel plating. Known defensive positions and intelligence warnings of multiple sniper threats. The Wraith, the shooter she had eliminated at 952 meters, had not been working alone. The operation would be the largest the base had mounted in 4 months. 4 platoons, 64 Marines, 3 casualty collection points, 2 medevac birds on standby, and a 15-minute extraction window that would not be extended under any circumstances. Captain Thorne's voice carried the weight of a man who understands that the mission he is briefing will ask things of people that cannot be fully prepared for. When the brief ended, the men filed out in silence. Captain Thorne emerged last. He saw Reese in the corridor. He stopped. "Hartley, tomorrow night, you are combat support medic for Chalk 2. He paused. "And secondary designated marksman if the situation requires it." She looked at him. He looked back with the steady gaze of a commander who has made a decision and is prepared to defend it. "Sir," she said, "I am not qualified as a designated marksman. You made a 950-meter shot under combat conditions with a weapon you had never been certified on. That makes you more qualified than anyone else available." He let that sit for a moment. "Your father was one of the best Marines I knew. You are proving you are his daughter." "Yes, sir." He walked away. Reese stood in the corridor for a long moment. Then she went to the medical station and began building her kit for the second time. This time the build was different. Medical ruck, 58 pounds. The same supplies she had carried before minus 2 packs of gauze to make room for additional rifle magazines. And the M40A3 sniper rifle. 14.5 pounds, total load 72.5 pounds. She shouldered the ruck and tested the weight distribution. The rifle sling across her chest. The balance of it. It felt like carrying 2 versions of herself at once. She thought about her father's letter. The hands that heal are the same hands that protect. They were always meant to work together. She had not fully understood what he meant when she first read it. She was beginning to understand now. That evening, she called her mother. The call went through on the second attempt, the satellite connection crackling with the particular static of distance and encryption. "Reese," her mother's voice. "Vivian Hartley, 52 years old, a widow for 12 years. A woman who had lost one person she loved to war and lived every day with the fear of losing another." "Hi, Mom. How are you, sweetheart? You sound tired." "Long days. It's fine." "You're being safe." Reese looked at the M40A3 rifle leaning against the wall, at the medical ruck beside it, at the mission brief notes she had written on her hand. "Mom, I need to tell you something." The line went quiet. "What's wrong?" "Last week, there was contact. Marines were pinned down by enemy fire. Our designated marksman was injured." She took a breath. "I picked up a rifle. I made the shot." Silence, long enough that Reese wondered if the connection had dropped. Then her mother's voice very quiet. "You broke the promise." "Yes." Another silence. "Your father's letter. He gave you permission, didn't he?" Reese felt the letter against her chest, the place where she had kept it since Chief Kane handed it to her. 12 years ago. But I kept the promise to you, Mom. I kept it as long as I could. Until people would die if I did." She heard her mother crying on the other end of the line. Soft sounds that carried across 7,000 miles and 12 years of grief. You are so much like him, Vivian said. I'm a medic first. That's still true. But you'll fight if you have to. Yes, Mom. Then come home, Reese. That's all I ask. Just come home. I promise. They stayed on the line for another minute, neither of them speaking. Just the presence of each other across the distance. A mother and a daughter and the ghost of a man who had made choices that shaped them both. When Reese hung up, she sat in the quiet of the medical station with her hands folded in her lap. The promise she had made at 11 years old was gone now, released by the person who had asked for it, replaced by a different promise. Come home. She intended to keep it. The mission stepped off at 2100 hours. The night was cooler than the last. 64 degrees, a half moon obscured by thin cloud cover, wind variable between 8 and 12 miles per hour from the west. 4 platoons moved in staggered columns across the desert floor. 64 men in body armor and full kit carrying the combined weight of ammunition, water, medical supplies, breaching charges, and the particular burden of knowing that some of them would not be walking back the way they came. Reese moved with Chalk 2, 12 men plus her, Brennan at point. Callahan recovered enough to deploy, moving with a slight limp but refusing to be left behind. Merrick 3 positions back, quieter than he had been on the last mission. The excitement replaced by something more sober. The ruck on her back was the heaviest thing she had ever carried, 72.5 pounds. The medical supplies that might save lives, and the rifle that might end them, distributed across her shoulders in a balance she was still learning. She had thought the weight would feel contradictory. It did not. It felt complete. They covered the 8 kilometers in 78 minutes. The compound appeared out of the darkness at 22:37. Larger than the previous target, 4 structures arranged in a square around a central courtyard. Walls 8 feet high topped with razor wire. A reinforced gate on the south side. The 4 chalks separated into their approach vectors without a word. Practiced, professional, the wordless choreography of men who have done this enough times that their bodies know the movements before their minds have finished planning them. Chalk 1 would breach the south gate. Chalk 3 would secure the western wall. Chalk 4 would provide overwatch from elevated positions 200 meters out. Chalk 2 would approach from the east and serve as the primary medical response and counter-sniper element. Reese settled into position behind a low berm 40 meters from the eastern wall. She had a clear line of sight to the compound interior and to the ridge lines beyond. The M40A3 was beside her. She had not loaded it yet. The medical ruck was at her left hand. She would know which one she needed when the time came. The breach happened at 23:45. Chalk 1 blew the south gate with a shaped charge that turned the reinforced steel into shrapnel and smoke. The assault team poured through the gap with the controlled violence of men trained to move fast and shoot straight. For the first 4 minutes, the operation proceeded according to plan. Then the floor of the second building collapsed. The IED had been placed under a false floor in what appeared to be a storage room. A secondary device designed not to kill immediately, but to trap and maim, to create casualties that would require rescue and thereby create more targets. It was effective. The explosion brought down a section of the ceiling and half of the western wall. 6 Marines from Chalk 1 went down in the rubble. The radio traffic that followed was controlled but urgent. Building 2 collapsed, 6 down, need medical immediate. Reese was moving before the transmission finished. She crossed the 40 meters of open ground at a sprint, the 72-pound ruck pounding against her back with each step. Incoming fire snapped past her head. She did not slow down. She entered the collapsed building through a gap in the wall. As she pushed through the gap, something sharp caught her left shoulder. Rebar, torn from the collapsed wall, jagged edge pointing inward. It tore through her uniform and embedded in the muscle below her clavicle. The pain was immediate, specific, the kind that tells you exactly what just happened. She did not stop moving. There was no time. The voice calling Doc was getting weaker. The interior was chaos, dust so thick it reduced visibility to arm's length. The smell of explosive residue and blood. The sound of men calling for help in the darkness. She found the first casualty by sound. A voice saying, Doc, in the particular tone of someone who needs to say it, but is running out of breath to do so. Lance Corporal Torres, both legs trapped under a fallen beam. Arterial bleeding from both femoral arteries, critical, 2 minutes to bleed out. Reese dropped her ruck and went to work. 2 tourniquets, 1 for each leg, high and tight above the wounds. She cinched them with the full strength of her arms until the pulsing stopped. She marked the times with her marker. 0054. Torres's eyes were open and staring at her with the wide clarity of shock. You're going to be fine, she said. not because it was certain, because he needed to hear it. She moved to the next casualty. Sergeant Vickers. Abdominal evisceration. The kind of wound that looks worse than it is until you realize it is exactly as bad as it looks. She needed pressure. Sustained focused pressure that would require both hands and would not allow her to move to the next casualty. Brick, she called into the dust. I need you here. Callahan appeared out of the darkness like a ghost. He saw the wound and understood immediately. He took the position she indicated and applied pressure while she moved. Private First Class Dalton, traumatic brain injury, skull fracture visible, airway compromised. She inserted a nasopharyngeal airway and positioned him in the recovery position to keep the airway clear. His breathing stabilized. The next 3 casualties were fragment wounds, serious but not immediately life-threatening. She applied hemostatic gauze and pressure bandages, marked each with a yellow tag for delayed evacuation, and moved to the next. 18 minutes. 6 casualties stabilized. Reese was covered in blood, her hands, her uniform, her face where she had wiped the sweat from her eyes. None of it was hers. Before she moved to the exit, she took 10 seconds for herself, the only 10 seconds she would take. She reached into her chest pocket with her right hand, pulled out a small pack of hemostatic gauze, tore it open with her teeth. She pushed the gauze into the wound in her left shoulder. The pain spiked white hot. She bit down hard and pushed it deeper until it seated against the source of the bleeding. 10 seconds. Then she stood up and moved toward the exit. There was more work to do. She was starting toward the exit when the radio transmission came through. Sniper Western Ridge Extreme Range, LZ is compromised. The landing zone for the medevac helicopter was 200 meters south of the compound. Open ground, the only flat area large enough for a Chinook to land, and now it was being covered by a sniper at extreme range. The first round had missed Captain Thorne by inches. The second had come close to Brennan. The third had forced Chalk 4 to abandon their overwatch position. Range estimate 1,200 meters. The voice on the radio was controlled but tight. We cannot get angle, repeat, cannot establish counter-sniper position. 1,200 meters. Reese stood in the doorway of the collapsed building covered in the blood of 6 men she had just saved and did the math. The M40A3's effective range was 800 meters. 1,200 was beyond specification, beyond what the rifle was designed to do. The probability of a successful shot at that range, even for an elite sniper, was less than 40%. She thought about her father, about the choice he had made in Kuwait, about the calculation he had run that ended with 8 men going home and 1 man staying behind. She thought about the 6 casualties in the building behind her, about the medevac helicopter that could not land, about the 15-minute extraction window that was now 11 minutes and counting. She keyed her radio. Master Sergeant Brennan, this is Hartley. I need to take that shot. A pause. 2 seconds that felt like an hour. Then Brennan's voice quiet and steady. You've been working trauma for 20 minutes. You're covered in blood. Hands are shaking. I'm the only option. Another pause. Do it! Reese exited the building and crossed the courtyard to the western wall. The M40A3 was where she had left it beside her medical ruck. She picked it up. Chief Kane was nearby his injured shoulder, preventing him from taking the shot himself. He looked at her with an expression that contained concern and something else. Something like pride. Reese, that's 1,200 meters, beyond the rifle's specs. The wind is variable. The angle is... I know what it is, Chief. She climbed to the elevated firing position on the western wall, a section of parapet that gave her the necessary height and a stable rest for the bipod. She settled into position and found the scope. 1,247 meters. The GPS rangefinder confirmed it. The ridgeline was a dark mass against the slightly lighter sky. She could not see the shooter, only the general area where the muzzle flashes had originated. The conditions were not ideal. Wind variable between 8 and 12 miles per hour, gusting from the west. Temperature had dropped to 64 degrees. Elevation differential 340 feet. Time was 01:13 the hour when thermal currents make the air unstable and unpredictable. She ran the calculations in her head. Bullet drop at 1,247 meters, approximately 18 feet. Wind drift at 10 miles per hour average, approximately 14 inches. But the wind was not steady, it was gusting, which meant she needed to read 3 zones, near, middle, and far. She watched the dust movement at 200 meters, 8 miles per hour, quartering right. She watched the brush at 600 meters, 10 miles per hour, same direction. She felt the air on her face and estimated the far wind at 12 miles per hour. Average of 10. Drift compensation, 14 inches left. But there was a problem. Her hands were shaking. Not badly, not enough that anyone watching would notice, but enough that the scope picture was not stable. The crosshairs wavering in small circles instead of holding steady. Adrenaline from 20 minutes of trauma work. Elevated heart rate. The body's chemical response to sustained intensity. She could not hold steady enough to make the shot. She closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she heard her father's voice. Not a memory. Something deeper than memory. The voice that lives in the place where training becomes instinct. When you cannot be still, find the stillness. She breathed. 4 count in, 4 count hold, 4 count out. She repeated the cycle 8 times. Her heart rate dropped. 94 beats per minute, then 86, then 78, then 72. She opened her eyes. The scope picture was steadier. She loaded the rifle and settled into the firing position. Bipod loaded. Natural point of aim established. Body positioned so that the rifle was pointing at the target without muscular effort. She held 14 inches left for the wind, 2 inches low to compensate for the up angle. The target was a section of ridgeline approximately 3 feet wide, the area where the muzzle flashes had originated. She waited. 45 seconds passed. The wind gusted. She felt it on her face. 12 miles per hour becoming 14. She held her fire. The wind settled. She found the space between heartbeats. She exhaled half a breath and held. She fired. The recoil pushed back against her shoulder. The scope picture jumped and settled. She kept her eye in the glass, watching the trace. 1.83 seconds of flight time. The round impacted high and right, 3 feet from the target, wind shift. She had read it at 12, but it had gone to 14 at the moment of firing. Incoming fire. A round snapped past her position and impacted the wall 8 inches to her left. Close. Very close. The enemy sniper had her position now. "Reese, get down," Brennan's voice on the radio. She did not get down. She chambered another round. This time she did not rush. She waited for the wind to stabilize. 90 seconds. Long enough for her heart rate to climb back to 86 beats per minute. Long enough for doubt to start creeping in. Long enough to remember that the medevac helicopter could not land and that the extraction window was now 8 minutes. Long enough to remember her promise to her mother. Come home. She pushed it aside. The wind settled to a steady 12 miles per hour. She confirmed it by watching the dust at all 3 range markers. Near middle far, all consistent. She adjusted her hold. 18 inches left instead of 14, accounting for the increased wind. She found the space between heartbeats again. She fired. The round flew true. 1,247 meters across the desert night. The enemy position on the ridge went silent. No more incoming fire. The radio crackled. "LZ is clear, medevac inbound." Reese lowered the rifle. She stood up from the firing position. The world tilted. Not dramatically. Just enough to remind her that she had been running on adrenaline and will for the better part of an hour, and that both of those things have limits. Brennan was beside her. When he had crossed the courtyard, she did not know. But he was there now, one hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "Easy, Doc. I got you." She tried to speak. Her mouth was dry. She swallowed and tried again. "Casualties. Everyone accounted for. All stable. Medevac is landing now." "Good." She tried to stay upright. The world tilted again, more insistent this time. Her knees buckled. Brennan caught her before she hit the ground. Lowered her carefully. "Corpsman," he called. "Need a corpsman." The irony was not lost on anyone. Merrick appeared running. He saw Reese on the ground and dropped beside her. "Doc!" He saw the blood. Her uniform was soaked with it. "Where are you hit?" "Not mine," she managed. "The casualties. Their blood." But then Merrick saw her left shoulder. The fabric there was a different color. Darker, fresher, the rebar from the building entry. She had felt it tear in when she pushed through the gap, had ignored it, had treated 6 Marines with a piece of metal lodged in her shoulder because stopping meant someone else might die. The rifle's recoil had worsened it, torn it wider. She had been bleeding for the better part of an hour. "Doc, you're bleeding." "Everyone accounted for?" she asked again. Brennan knelt beside her. "Everyone. You made sure. All 6 from the building are on the bird. The LZ is clear because you cleared it. Everyone is accounted for." She nodded. "Then I can stop now." "Yeah, Doc, you can stop." She did. The darkness came up to meet her, and she let it. She woke 6 hours later in the field hospital at Forward Operating Base Fallujah. The ceiling was white canvas. The light was the particular quality of LED strips running along the ridge poles. There was an IV line in her right arm and a dressing on her left shoulder. A young corpsman was sitting beside the bed. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Patterson, 24 years old, competent, and currently experiencing significant relief at seeing her eyes open. Doc Hartley, welcome back. Her throat was dry. She swallowed. Casualties, building collapse, 6 Marines. All survived. Medevac to Baghdad. You saved them. Chalk 3, sniper fire. LZ cleared. Everyone extracted safe. You made the shot. She processed this. 6 saved. Extraction successful. Mission complete. How long was I out? 6 hours. Blood loss, exhaustion, physiological shock. You pushed hard, Doc. She tried to sit up. Patterson moved to stop her, then thought better of it. He had heard the stories. He knew that telling Reese Hartley to stay in bed was unlikely to be productive. She swung her legs off the cot. The world swam for a moment, then stabilized. Doc, you should rest. I need to see. See what? Outside. Patterson hesitated. Then he said, there's something you should know. Outside, people have been gathering since you were brought in. She looked at him. What do you mean gathering? Just, you should see for yourself. She stood. Patterson offered his arm for support. She waved it off. She could walk. She made it to the entrance of the field hospital on her own legs. She pushed back the canvas flap. The morning light hit her first. Golden, the particular quality of desert sunrise when the air is cool and clear and the dust has not yet risen. Then she saw what Patterson had meant. The main compound of Forward Operating Base Fallujah was full of people, not conducting business, not moving between stations, just standing, arranged in loose formation, informal but intentional. The arrangement of people who have chosen to be somewhere together to mark something that matters. There were more than 200 of them, Marines in desert utilities, Navy personnel in working uniforms, SEAL operators in mixed kit, Army Rangers from the Quick Reaction Force, support personnel, mechanics, cooks, communications operators, the people who keep a forward operating base functioning in 1,000 necessary ways that never appear in any citation for heroism, but without which heroism has nowhere to occur. They were all there. And as Reese appeared in the doorway, the movement began, starting from the front row, spreading backward like a wave. Every hand came up. 280 people in the morning light of Anbar province, in silence. Every hand raised in salute. Reese stood in the doorway and did not move. She had not understood until this moment what the previous night had meant. Not to her. She knew what she had done. She retained every detail with the precise clarity of experiences that occur when the brain's recording systems are operating at maximum capacity. But she had not understood what it had meant to the people who had been there beside her. She understood now. In the front row, she saw Trent Callahan, standing on his injured leg with a crutch for support. His eyes were red. He had been crying. His hand was raised with the precision of a man who has performed this gesture for 16 years and knows exactly how it should be done, and is performing it now with everything he has. She looked at him and thought about the first day, the comment about them sending a kid, the long revision that had followed, the moment in the collapsed building when he had taken over pressure on a wound without being asked, because he knew what she needed before she said it. Beside him, Wade Merrick, standing straighter than she had ever seen him stand, his first real mission. The first time he had seen what courage looks like when it is not performed but simply present. His hand raised, his eyes locked on hers. A young man who would remember this moment for the rest of his life. Further back, Chief Silas Kane, one arm in a sling, the other raised, the man who had kept a 12-year promise, who had carried a letter across years and distance and bureaucratic indifference because a dead captain had asked him to find his daughter. He was watching her with tears on his face. Captain Holden Thorne stood off to the side, the rare smile on his face, the expression of a commander who has taken a calculated risk and watched it prove correct in ways he could not have predicted. His hand was raised. And in the center of the front row, Master Sergeant Cade Brennan, 58 years old, Panama, Gulf War, Somalia, a man who had seen enough combat to have developed opinions about who belongs in it and who does not. A man who had watched her step off a helicopter 11 days ago and had reserved judgment. No judgment left to reserve now. His hand was raised with the precision of 38 years of service. His eyes were locked on hers, and in his expression was something she had not seen directed at her before. Pride, pure, uncomplicated pride. The kind a father shows when he watches his daughter become who she was always meant to be. She had lost her father 12 years ago, but standing in that doorway looking at Cade Brennan, she understood that she had found something of him again. in the man who had chosen to see her clearly, to test her fairly, to protect her when she needed it, and to trust her when it mattered most. She raised her right hand. It was not crisp. She was exhausted. Her arm was weak from blood loss, but she raised it. She returned the salute. In the front row, Callahan exhaled. It was barely audible. But in the silence of 280 people standing still, it was the loudest sound in the compound. Relief and pride and grief and something close to joy all released in a single breath. The moment held. Then Colonel Richard Hammond stepped forward. He was 56 years old, the base commander, a man who had spent 34 years in the Marine Corps and had learned that some ceremonies are necessary not because they change anything, but because they acknowledge what has already changed. He carried 2 wooden boxes, navy blue cloth covering, the size and shape that everyone who has attended a military awards ceremony recognizes before the lid is open. He approached Reese and stopped 3 feet in front of her. Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class Reese Alexandra Hartley. His voice was formal, but it carried an undertone of something else. The ceremony might be required. The emotion behind it was not. On behalf of the Commandant of the Marine Corps and the Secretary of the Navy, he paused. This part never became easier, no matter how many times he had done it. The Navy Cross, awarded posthumously to Captain Garrett James Hartley, United States Marine Corps, for extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry in the face of overwhelming enemy forces. Kuwait Theater of Operations, February 26, 1991. He stopped. Let that settle. This award was approved March 10, 1991, 12 days after Captain Hartley's death. Due to classification review and administrative delays extending over 12 years, it was never presented to his family. His voice hardened slightly. That failure is acknowledged. Today we correct it. He opened the first box. The Navy Cross lay on dark blue lining, bronze cross patty, an eagle anchor and scroll at the center, suspended from a navy blue ribbon with a thin white center stripe. The metal caught the morning light with the flat honesty of metal made with care. Not ornate, not meant to be, meant to signify something specific, and it did. Reese took the box with her left hand. The right was still raised in salute. She looked at the medal her father had earned 12 years ago, the recognition that had been delayed by bureaucracy and classification, and the particular indifference that large institutions sometimes show to the people who serve them. She had never seen it before, had not known it existed until 3 minutes ago, and now she held it. The weight of her father's sacrifice made physical. Colonel Hammond opened the second box. The Silver Star, awarded to Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class Reese Alexandra Hartley, United States Navy, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against enemy forces. Iraq Theater of Operations, March 15, 2003. He read from the citation card. While under intense enemy fire, Corpsman Hartley provided life-saving medical treatment to 12 critically wounded Marines across 2 separate engagements, demonstrated exceptional courage by eliminating enemy sniper threat at 952 meters, enabling rescue of PIN-friendly forces. Subsequently, while still treating mass casualty event, engaged and eliminated second enemy sniper at extreme range of 1,247 meters, clearing landing zone for medical evacuation. Her actions directly resulted in the preservation of 12 American lives. He looked up from the card. Corpsman Hartley's extraordinary heroism and dedication to duty reflect great credit upon herself and the United States Naval Service. He opened the box, the Silver Star, a silver 5-pointed star with a small gold star at the center, suspended from a crimson ribbon with white and blue edges. Reese took it with her right hand, finally lowering her salute. She held both boxes, her father's medal in her left hand, hers in her right. She brought them together, touched them. 2 generations, 2 wars, 2 different battles fought with the same values. Colonel Hammond stepped back and saluted. Your father earned his medal for sacrifice, he said. You earned yours for achieving what seems impossible. Medical treatment in combat action, healing and protecting. He knew you could do both. 280 hands were still raised. Reese looked at the medals, at the men and women who had gathered to witness this, at the morning light turning everything golden. Then Master Sergeant Brennan stepped forward. He did not salute. He had already done that. He simply stood in front of her, this man who had become the father she needed when she needed one most, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. I served with your father. Kuwait, 91. Best Marine I ever knew. His voice was steady, but there was something in it, a thickness, an emotion he was containing but not hiding. He would be here if he could. Since he cannot, I will speak for him. He paused. The emotion broke through for just a moment. His voice cracked. He recovered. He would say, "That's my girl. Knew you had it all along. Steady hands, clear eyes. Everything else is just noise." Reese felt the tears before she could stop them. The first time in the entire deployment, she did not try to hide them. She just let them fall. Brennan's own eyes were wet now. "Thank you, Doc," he said quietly, "for being exactly who you are." She could not speak. She just nodded. Brennan stepped back and saluted again. Then he turned and walked away, giving her the space to process what had just happened. The formation began to disperse, not quickly, with the slow, respectful movement of people who understand they have witnessed something significant. They came to her one by one. Callahan approached on his crutch. "Doc, that tourniquet. Perfect placement. I would have bled out." "That's the job, Brick." He shook his head. "No, that's you being the best at the job. It was an honor serving with you." He extended his hand. She shook it. Merrick came next, nervous but determined. "Doc, you taught me what brave looks like. You were brave before I showed up Rook. Not like you. Then be better than me." He smiled. "Yes, ma'am." One by one they came, Marines whose names she knew and some she did not, each with a word, a handshake, a moment of acknowledgement. By the time the last of them had dispersed, the sun was fully up. The golden light had burned away into the white glare of another desert day. Reese stood alone in the compound, holding two boxes that contained 2 medals and 12 years of grief and 1 night of courage and the weight of a promise kept and a promise broken and a new promise made. Come home. She intended to. 20 years later, on a March morning in 2023, Reese Alexandra Hartley stood in front of a classroom at the Naval Medical Training Facility in Camp Pendleton, California. She was 43 years old now. Master Chief Hospital Corpsman, the highest enlisted rank in her field. A Silver Star recipient, a woman whose name was known by every Navy medic who had come after her. A legend, though, she would never have used that word. The classroom held 32 students, a mix of corpsmen, Army medics, and a few special operations personnel, cross-training in tactical medicine. She looked at them the way she had learned to look at people 20 years ago in a desert on the other side of the world, with attention, with assessment, with the understanding that each of them would face moments that would ask things of them they could not fully prepare for. On the whiteboard behind her, written in her clean, precise hand, "Steady hands, clear eyes, heal when you can, fight when you must, both matter." She picked up a marker. "You are not just medics," she said. "You are warriors who heal. Some of you will face the choice. Treat the wounded or eliminate the threat. The answer is that sometimes you do both." A hand went up. Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class Morrison, 24 years old, eager. "Master Chief, is it true you made a shot at 1,247 meters? She set down the marker. GPS confirmed 1,247. Wind was variable. While treating a mass casualty, after stabilizing 6 critically wounded. Priorities. Another student. "How do you do both?" She thought about that, about the night in the collapsed building, about the choice between the medical ruck and the rifle, about the realization that it was not a choice, it was both. "Training," she said. "Repetition. Knowing who you are. My father taught me to shoot before I knew what shooting meant. The Navy taught me to save lives. Iraq taught me I would need both." There was a knock at the door. It opened, and Master Sergeant Cade Brennan stepped in. He was 78 years old now, retired for 15 years. He used a cane, his hair was silver, his face was weathered by time and sun and memory. But his back was still straight, his eyes still sharp. The students stood immediately. They knew who he was. The stories had reached them. "Class," Reese said, "this is the man who taught me what it means to be a warrior." Brennan waved a hand. "She's being modest. She taught herself. I just did not get in the way." The students sat back down. Brennan moved to the front of the classroom. Reese stepped aside, giving him the floor. This was his story to tell as much as hers. "March 15th, 2003. Iraq," he began. "I watched a 23-year-old corpsman step off a helicopter. I thought they sent us a kid." He paused. 6 hours later, she saved 12 lives. Medical treatment under fire. 2 impossible sniper shots. Kept working until every Marine was accounted for. Then collapsed from blood loss because she had treated everyone else first. The classroom was silent. Her father, Captain Garrett Hartley, died saving 8 Marines in 1991. She lived saving 12 Marines in 2003. That is legacy. That is what it means to serve. He looked at Reese. I am proud to have known both of them. I am proud to call her family. Reese felt the emotion rising again. Even after 20 years. Even after telling the story 100 times. It still reached the place where the memories lived. "Thank you, Kodiak," she said quietly. He nodded. Then he turned to the students. "Learn from her. Not just the skills, the character, the willingness to do what must be done when it must be done. That is what separates good medics from great ones." He looked back at Reese. "You did good, Doc. Your father would say the same." After the class, they walked together across the training facility grounds. An old warrior and a warrior who was no longer young. Father and daughter by choice, not blood. "Do you ever regret it?" Brennan asked. "Breaking the promise?" Reese thought about her mother, about the phone call she had made from Iraq, about the release she had been given. "I kept both promises," she said. "I promised Mom I would come home. I did. I promised Dad I would use my skills when it mattered. I did." Brennan nodded. He would be proud. He is proud, wherever he is. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment. "I am proud too, Reese," Brennan said. "Like you were my own daughter." It was the first time he had said it that directly. After 20 years. "You were the father I needed when I needed one," she said. "Thank you, Kodiak." He stopped walking. Looked at her with those sharp eyes that age had not dimmed. "The honor was mine, Doc." They continued on. Two warriors who had fought different battles in different wars, but who shared the same understanding of what it meant to serve. In Reese's office, there was a shadow box on the wall. It contained two medals. On the left, her father's Navy Cross. On the right, her Silver Star. Between them, a photograph of Captain Garrett Hartley holding his infant daughter in 1980. Below the photo, two items. A spent 7.62 millimeter casing from her 1,247 meter shot in her father's dog tags. A plaque beneath read, "Captain Garrett Hartley and Master Chief Reese Hartley, steady hands, clear eyes. Legacy continues 1991. 2003 to 2023. Reese stood at her office window looking out at the training grounds. Students were running medical drills on one field. On the range beyond, others were learning to shoot. Some were learning both. The next generation, preparing for the choices they would have to make. The moments when they would need to decide which tool to reach for, the medical ruck or the rifle, or both. She thought about her father's letter, the words she had carried for 20 years. "You were built for both, Reese. The hands that heal are the same hands that protect." They were always meant to work together. She had not understood it when she first read it. She understood it now. She touched the shadow box, the medals, the photograph, the physical remnants of a promise kept and a legacy honored. Then she turned and walked back to the classroom. There was work to do. There were students to teach. There was a generation to prepare for the choices that would come. Steady hands, clear eyes. Everything else was just noise.